Ladies and gentlemen, what a year! We're going to have a chance now to reflect on the year that you've just had in IT, and we're going to ask 3 core questions. Did IT achieve much last year? What were the gains that we achieved? And how do we sustain those gains going forward into 2021? So I've got 3 esteemed IT executives here. I've got Mark in Dubai, so bear with us, we've got some brains to tap, and the first question I'm going to pose is, what did IT gain last year? Did we really achieve something? And John, you gave me an expression, a coming of age. So what was coming of age last year about IT?
Well, I think kudos to everybody in this room and your teams for what happened through last year, and I think the stocks, the appreciation, the trust in us as IT and business leaders really rose through the year. And I work for a healthcare company, so 72 hospitals in Australia, another 400 overseas. But it's also a bit of a diagnostic, right? Was the organisation surprised on how well we performed? And that might tell us a bit of insight into kind of how they view us.
Yes, yes. Now, I want to come to you, Sammy, after Jackie, because Jackie, I want to ask you, you were telling me, look at all the products we've now got, all the things we digitized. You were very ebullient about what IT achieved last year.
Yeah, so really, IT got out of a status update in a steering committee into the executive table. And being in we're all great in a crisis. We all know technologists just thrive in a crisis, and really being in that crisis in front of the executive day in, day out, making changes, enabling our employees, our clients, our partners in that supply chain. I don't think there was an appreciation of actually what we do day in, day out, because we are quite reserved and around that, and so having it at the table really got a voice, and I think that was just the real positivity, as you said, John, a deep appreciation of what could be, and what we did was phenomenal.
Okay, but Sammy, you were very quick to caution me, we shouldn't get too conceited, because there are a lot of heroes last year. I mean, both you and John work in health, and you both said something similar to me. We need to recognize that we weren't alone in actually contributing to what the business did.
Absolutely. I think John said very well, and you contributed as well in a similar way. In a way, we came as heroes. It was, one is acknowledgement. Actually, wow, we thought this guy was hopeless because all the projects failed and delayed, etc. Some good stuff could also happening. It was really a good payoff, like many years of investment, the culture, your people's responsiveness, and business, like almost like there was a wow factor, which we need to turn to a kind of an advantage, like Churchill says, never waste a crisis. Yeah. So just utilizing that, and as you mentioned.
But you also mentioned to me, Sammy, about how we disprove negatives. You know, all this sort of people who would use no instinctively as a reason not to do something. Yep. We now have the evidence that actually you can work this way. You can maintain productivity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, I think there was a couple of key learnings here. The one thing is, when the COVID thing hit early March, and we asked that make everyone working from home, it wasn't a task really, it was a mission, almost like saving Ryan. So this is about making our staff working safely, as well as our customers getting the services. So when you set the mission and get the relevant people together and empower them to operate, you amaze, which we all amaze actually, how much can be achievable. And then people realize, hang on a minute, why we don't do this every way in our project? There's such a heavy governance and the controls and the presentations compared to empowering people, giving the mission, let them doing this, let them accessing the decision makers, and much speeder. Like my example is the contact center. We take the whole contact center, which we have multiple of them, working from home in 2 weeks' time. In a normal project line, this is a 6 to 12 months project.
Yeah. I want to come to fast decision makers. I think that's one of the gains. And I know John gave me, it's great, but don't be careful. There's downsides to fast decisions. So let me come to that. But I want to go to you, Mark, because you were talking to me about how much of a change was it? You know, was it just responsive to events, or did we make organic change? And you had some thoughts on that. Could you share those?
Of course, Peter, thanks. So clearly we have made significant leapfrogs. I think I would share with you a conversation with a partner at McKinsey who was sharing that in average, their clients, they reported 6 to 7 years acceleration in their digital transformation. So the transformation has happened. I guess one of the conversations is whether there was a reactive transformation that really created the foundation for the companies to think that way, or whether we'll see some of these dynamics of resistance to change eventually bouncing back once we'll have an appearance of normalcy. And I think where we were talking in our conversation is I doubt that it was just really a cultural transformation. I think it was mainly reacting to the events. The company that was shifted over to cultural, they now think of innovation and technology as part of their mindset. Other companies, they will see this just as a way, as an antidote to a crisis, but not necessarily permeated across the organizational fabric. So a bit of, I think, a question mark is we'll see in the next few years which company have really integrated this as part of their mindset and which company just thought of this just as a quick fix to a problem they were trying to face.
But Jackie, that was your view to me about how much the digitization of the business had accelerated. You know, COVID was the C-suite executive that drove the digital transformation of the business.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's, I think when right at the beginning, that digital savvy top management team, I mean, it's really harnessing. Is the top management team going to keep going and evolving and accelerating through the use of amazing technology? And just some examples, moving to a cloud-only contact center platform, a bit like what you were talking about, pulling all of your employees onto a collaboration tool. That was interesting and very important. But what we found was actually mobilizing the whole organization to have transparency of all of the processes, and through using the modern technologies around Jira, Confluence, and rolling it out across the firm when previously it was just in tech. And I mean, this gave us a voice in the organization that said, how do we get it at a very much more senior and executive level that still continues on today? But once they have that, it's amazing.
But what I'm hearing you say, you've opened up executive mindsets. So the idea, the executives see new possibilities. Yeah. That's both a blessing and a curse, isn't it? Because their expectations could be ahead of what's feasible.
And also once it's in their hands, then you get more questions. But then again, you've got to set yourself up to say, I don't have all the answers. We've got a way in which to open and create these transparent conversations so as to build something that's really amazing. Okay.
John, you were telling me about the faster decision making. You know, both you and Sammy are in a fairly heavily regulated business. I mean, sometimes they're blocks or stops to actually make sure, you know, human lives aren't lost and all of that sort of stuff. So how do you harness fast decision making, but also have some form of governance in it?
Well, I think it's in our human nature to kind of think, you know, in two ways, right? Black and white, or yes or no, or, you know, we kind of struggle with finding our way through the kind of the grey zone. So I think it's really around recognising, first of all, that it's not a one-size-fits-all, that fast decision making in every scenario isn't good, but it's teasing out and understanding where a fast decision is a good thing and where you really need to slow things down. And, you know, perhaps one could argue that a lot of the findings in the various royal commissions and commissions of inquiry that financial services and others, aged care, and are dealing with, really perhaps come through not really thinking through a lot of those decisions and the complexities behind them. So I think it's more around just understanding where one needs to slow down and where one should go fast. But where we can make fast decisions, we should absolutely embrace it.
Sammy, would you add anything to that from your experience?
The only thing I'll add that slow decision making doesn't necessarily better actually. Because we are not talking about careless decision making. We are talking about fast decision making in terms of you still have a framework, you still have non-negotiables based on upprice expectations or health-related concerns, etc. Those principles will be always there. However, how to go from point A to B, empowering people, less points for that decision making, because what happens most of the time, it has to go multiple committees. You have to wait 2 weeks because the committee meeting is in 2 weeks' time. This is why you are waiting rather than a lot of analysis and other works happening. So the time we wait, not for valuable stuff. So the recent concept I heard, part of a study I did recently, is the minimum viable governance. What's the minimum viable governance? That these are my non-negotiables, principles, however, everything else It's up to us how we'll do it fastly and quickly.
That's an interesting takeaway. Mark, what would you add in terms of fast decision making?
So I think, Peter, if you remember from our conversation, one of my worries was that whether the fast decision making were also building capacity for the future, or the only way to actually save the moment. One of the challenges that I have seen is that unless we are looking at crisis and opportunity to expand capacity, so that we can simply create the resilience, as I was mentioning before. Sometimes we say that, if you're not using a crisis in the proper way, it's a missed opportunity for what could really happen in the past. So again, I think the organizational structure has many times adapted to understanding that decision-making had to be very different from before. This is why for the first time, the idea of agile governance was introduced more and more. We will read about this, a business magazine, we're talking about it. And this is great. If we can use this crisis as a way of redefining governance inside the organization, I think we really are learning the way forward. I'm hoping that the governance is also coming with decision-making that are equally changing power structures, not necessarily just from the top, but across the function of the organizations. They're probably most equipped and qualified to understand the rapid succession that happens in a crisis.
Okay, it's interesting you're talking about formal governance, but one of the things I got from you, John, was one of the gains this year was there was no backseat driving of IT. The finance people did finance, IT did IT, health people did health people. Have you seen that maintained, that sort of informal governance, they entrust you to do the IT bit?
I think so. I think it probably varies in industries. I think in healthcare, it's very protocol driven. Nurses and doctors and physicians are trained in certain ways, so they kind of tend to stay on the railway tracks. And so technologists kind of there's less challenge than if David Hackshaw might have gone. But I was previously at Cochlear, where you're dealing with a lot of engineers. You kind of had that engineering and technologist tension. So I think it will continue for some time, but then things revert to long-term patterns over time. So it's our role to kind of stem that reversion back.
Okay.
Where it's not too helpful.
One of your observations, Sammy, was that actually we were more comfortable with a minimal viable product. We didn't go seeking perfection. People found, let's get something up, let's get it running, and then we'll improve it as we go. Could you explain some of how that impacted you?
Sure. Look, I think it's also relevant to your previous question as well. Everything is a risk. There's a benefit versus risk. As you take smaller steps, you will have less risk, actually. This is linked to the speedy kind of delivery. And as you do the steps, you will learn what is there. And then you realize, actually, direction is wrong, or I have to put my step this way rather than this way, and it evolves. And what you realize, as you keep delivering, you're already in the journey, you're already delivering something, you're already testing your ideas, rather than your design and many months and then go to market. It's too late, market moved on. Whatever the first idea is no longer there. So this is why I think speed is very important, and it marks very interesting observations and some of the data you supply. Some countries was so adaptable and so quick through the COVID period, and the game changed. The cards has been distributed again. Some countries was here, no longer there, whereas some others coming, because they had that capabilities, but they play the game very, very differently. It's same for the corporate world.
But Jackie, you come from AMP, and I'm sorry, but I know AMP was under the spotlight with the Royal Commission just a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of governance that's been put on the organisation as a result of that. Yep. How can you have fast speed and also adhere to those sort of governance challenges?
So one of the main things was this ruthless prioritisation. I think everyone would recognise when you were in the moment, you were really focused on getting through the key outcomes, and as you mentioned, every day was the next step and the next step. As long as there was the right level of guardrails that sat around what you did. And I mean, we didn't have one major incident in this process because we let the people who are empowered to do the work in the way that they need to do it. And so it's really, as an executive team, how do we have the guardrails in place, those processes, those systems, to help the amazing technologists who are in our teams to do the amazing work that they can do, but how do we not give them too much? Because that prioritisation, if you give someone 24 hours worth of work to do in an 8-hour day, they are just physically not able to do it. And I think that's a real question for both technology execs as well as a broader company, that we really need to slow down to speed up and really pick the right things to work on in parallel.
Okay. Mark, would you add anything to those observations?
Well, I was thinking about how do we eventually try to cement this so that it's not necessarily becoming an ephemeral effort. And one of the things that was coming to my mind is when back in time, IT was always separated from the rest of the organization. And whenever there was a problem, people were pointed at IT. In many parts of the company, IT was even a different building. I think today we're learning that the integration of the performance indicators across technology, business, of course, frontliner, the B2C to the B2B is a critical part of how we were rethinking what is an organization in the future. And the fact that we're building this cross-functionality across department, I think is something that I find it personally very healthy. I always suffer a lot these silos of expertise that sometimes we're not talking to each other. I guess the crisis was pushing people to eventually build this cross-functional channels. And I'm hoping this will also be reflected also for those who are coming afterwards, who might have not really experienced the crisis from within the organizations, that we have created an inherited structure to think about fluidity in organization, reflecting the nature of market, rather than structure that tends to be quite rigid, but quite dissonant from how markets have become these days.
But sometimes that rigidity is there, Mark, because people never trusted IT in the past. We didn't deliver. And yet you spoke to me, one thing you saw that came out of last year was there was a much greater trust in the rest of the organization about what IT could deliver.
Absolutely. I think it's the same we were discussing when we suddenly looked at the work from home became institutionalized as normal. But I do remember when working from home, it depends greatly on the country. More progressive country or company, they were fine with it. Other company would have never really trusted people working from home. And suddenly we had no option but actually surrender to trust. And we now discovered that work from home actually does not necessarily decrease the productivity of a firm. So I think trust has been probably the exchange currency we had in times of crisis. But going back to, I think, what John was saying before, I'm always concerned that sometimes we bounce back to the old normals just because we think it is a comfortable place to be. Maybe it would be nice for us to accept the idea that the old normal might unlikely happen the same way as it was before. And so we are looking at the road ahead and building that architecture from now on. So I see this as actually one of the greatest opportunities to discontinue decades of the traditional Tayloristic model of the firm, top down, very rigid. And I think trust is really the water that navigates through the different channels.
Okay. John, you were talking to me about how new functionality like telehealth, robotics, things like very transformational stuff. But on the other hand, that you were also sort of cautious, how much transformation did we really achieve last year? And I was left with a sort of ambivalent view of what you thought about that. What do you see? Because I would see IT did a lot of original stuff last year.
Well, I guess we had an interesting discussion about what is transformation and kind of where do you draw the bar, right? And one could argue that even just having our businesses survive through COVID and flourish is transformational. But I guess what we have to avoid the trap of thinking that just the fact that we can have people doing their job from home and working remotely, as opposed to in the office, is some kind of transformation. I mean, it's a great thing and it kept things running, but it didn't help us innovate with new products and services or move into new markets or take out the competition. So I think perhaps we can't let it go to our head, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Because you were talking about organic change there really, and I think that supports what John's saying, Mark, is that right? The idea that this was reactive rather than actually visionary.
Yeah, I think so. It's at least I have seen in different parts of the world this being almost like a survival mechanism that was about trying to do whatever you can to save the business. We, at the early stages of the crisis, cash flow was a big problem for many companies. So you could hear conversation about how do we simply save the business and preserve it. What you usually apply in crisis management doesn't necessarily stay as institutionalized afterwards. It's the whole design of a crisis management. I think what we should understand is that this was not just an episodic crisis. I think this is where I'm trying to really emphasize. This is just the very beginning of a set of transformation that we are, I think, due to undergo. They were due already before. It's just that we were having a system that was still holding on a really thin layer of ice. COVID has demonstrated the fragility of the model we had before. And I think it's mainly a fragility in terms of the financial management we were applying before. And now it can be actually reflected on so many different hidden costs that were happening inside of the organization. So if we can empower, I think, especially the CIOs, which is the emphasis of our conference, to really drive that form of transformation. I see a little bit like what used to happen back in time with the CFOs driving the organization forward. At the time, finance was driving. I think today, technology is really where we have to understand the opportunity ahead of us. So it's just a different sense of redistribution of I think, driving seats, especially given this time. But again, IT has always been, and technology information officers has always been much more integrated between C-suite and finance. So I guess it's just about rethinking about what is the role of a company today and how do we make decisions.
If I may add one thing, Peter,
Go on.
this definition. The CIO, what it stands for, Chief Information Officer, I think we need to think differently, and the role is turning more like a Chief Influencing Officer on the table. So rather than just I'm here to execute for you, actually they desperately need our help, and we need to tell them, like Jackie mentioned that the digital dexterity, data dexterity, but they don't really know. And this is our role, not as an individual, but also our team, start acting like consultants and helping them, challenging them constructively rather than trying to please them.
Okay, well, I've got a question about your teenage children, so I'll come back to that later on. But people have been telling me that we should actually become really the chief operating officers. Our role is much more broader in what we're doing in an organization. We need to widen our horizons. What are your thoughts on that, Jackie?
Look, I look at technology and data, and we're all data technology organisations that deliver product and services. So to operate a firm, whether it's the products you sell, the clients you service, the supply chain that underpins it, we are all there in service of that end outcome. So we should all see ourselves as chief operating officers at the end of the day. And how do I look at knowledge workers, and how do I look at digital workers, or the digital robots that can do amazing things to give our people and our employees even better work to do. And so that's sort of the mindset that, and I don't have all the answers, but it's more around how do you feed that vision and that opportunity into the organisation, because we will be left behind if we actually don't harness this.
And that gets to the question, how do we cement? We've obviously, it's clear from all of you, in some ways we made a lot of progress last year in our respect in the business, what we've been able to deliver, our trust between fellow executives. How do we lock that in?
So one of the key themes that I see, and we've played out a lot in AMP, is a lot of deep literacy programs, consistency, continuity, and just continuing to evolve. And I know most people would see the cyber literacy that happened probably 5-10 years ago. I mean, that was really sort of the first for some of the departments. Now it's how do we take that into automation? How do we take that into data? How do we take that into the whole ecosystem of digital through the firm, from the ground roots all the way up, and have those universities, have those academies, and people actually get kudos for doing the certifications needed to be really savvy in this world.
Okay, I've got a question for the audience. Who here's got a teenage child? Thank you very much, because Sammy is going to tell you how we should talk to our business people like we talk to teenage children. Sammy, could you pass on your advice to that?
There is no science behind this. We were just talking with Peter last week, and I was using just an analogy. Like, if you think about the relationship between business versus IT people, they generally hate us, not much trust, go away. You don't know my business better than me, etc. And this is what happens between a parent and teenage as well. Teenage, you can think 13, 15, actually nowadays drop to the 4 and 5. They already know better than you. And what happens? They push you away. They tell you, I hate you. Actually, that's the time they most needed you. They desperately need you. We need to find a way stopping them doing silly mistakes, like the business making silly decisions. But if you put your arrogance, if you push them, they will not listen to you. So we need to really apply significant empathy, understanding things, understanding their business really well, and showing them, I understand your problems, I understand market factors and your customer pain points, etc. And this is the way I think I can help you. Then they will start listening to you. So we don't really need to wait permission or I'm already failing on execution, so I don't have a right to talk. Actually, it's your responsibility to talk and finding ways, create that trusted kind of connection.
Do you think that empathy between IT and the business, are you seeing evidence of that, John?
Yeah, I do. And, businesses and organisations are made up of people, and people yearn relationship, right? And that's why it's painful if we have a breaking of a relationship with our children or others. I've kind of been thinking about this in a far more dull way than what Sammy was expressing. There's so much social capital built up last year, right, and goodwill. So we've got to spend it. And I think the key for us is working out how to spend it in a relationship asset that doesn't depreciate, but one that appreciates. And if we can kind of get that virtuous cycle happening, then you can kind of build on it. And it's not easy, and there's no panacea, there's no secret sauce that you can apply. But I think that saying, that the soft stuff's the hard stuff, I think we've got to remember that though a lot has changed in the last 12 months with the rules, with the COVID and a lot of the rules changing, a lot of the key things, the empathy, the soft stuff needs to still be there, and it's probably more important now than it ever was.
Okay. Mark, you're someone also used the word social capital to me. John gave his view of it. What do you see as social capital?
Well, I see the opportunity for us to rethink about the role of firms right now, considering the fact that automation and a high level of technology solution are replacing, of course, the traditional concept of work. And I guess it goes in the conversation about how do we now think of work and talent, considering that every company is becoming a technology company. A way for us to remember is we used to have the finance company, we used to have the engineering company, we used to have the accounting companies. Today, we have in the technology company. So what does a concept of value and social capital mean in a given context where technology is taking a significant role? I guess it's an opportunity to think of technology augmenting the workforce and augmenting people. I think the role that I would imagine for a technology officer is to really start developing the organization in a direction that doesn't necessarily create a trade-off between technology solution and employability. I think that's the nature of social capital. If we're building companies that use technology for augmenting human-centric systems, really we're going to see an entirely different renaissance in many ways, capable of really tapping on the power of technology, but using technology also to elevate people. I think this is the redefinition of social capital in the years to come. It's exciting to imagine that we can design that ahead of us and not necessarily letting the old model keep on working, because I think it will keep on eroding the social capital.
Jackie, that's an exciting future that Mark plays. Are you enthused by it, or do you think, how do we really start creating the new business,
Oh, hugely enthused. I would go, we're only just at the beginning, and there is so much thought leadership within our firms and within the art of the possible that I would just go, this is what excites people, this is what gets them out of bed in the morning, and to create those amazing next evolutionary steps into the marketplace. So, I'm hugely excited for the opportunity.
Okay, and John, you spoke about we're actually steering the ship in many ways, which I thought is a really bold claim from IT, which is only a few years ago was seen as a back office sort of function.
Yeah.
Now we're out there telling the rest of the business where we should be going.
Yeah, I think that's true, but that's not necessarily. It's coming from the CIOs sometimes, but also it's coming from other executives, because we're all generalists now, right? We know a lot about industrial relations and HR and finance and all that kind of stuff, and technology, but so do our peers. So yeah, it's just about harnessing that and working, co-opting, helping our peers be successful.
Okay. Sammy, I'm going to give you the last word. What do you think of the future role of the CIO in steering the ship?
Yeah, look, I'll just endorse what John said. I think if we pretend we really know better than them and we try to do everything ourselves, it's a setup for failure, not only for us, but for organizations. It's more about how we'll empower our colleagues, them to make right decisions, almost embedding technology in their teams, and IT people feeling actually I'm part of business, and business feeling that these are my people, not from another planet, bad guys from technology coming. It's all same. There is no business versus technology. It's a business and business, and there are two scenarios. We all winning, we all losing. We just probably need to pick we all winning scenario.
So what you're saying, Sammy, is we've all proved we're human in IT. All right?
I hope so.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, can we please thank our panelists for their thoughts?